Will you marry me? Graham's voice cracked as he knelt on the candlelit beach, the waves crashing softly behind him. Lena stared at the man who had once called her the wrong name. The same man who had shattered her heart and then fought like hell to win it back. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Yes. 1,000 times, yes. But how did it come to this? A billionaire CEO, a small-town waitress mistaken for someone she was never meant to be. One misunderstanding that turned into the most unexpected love story of their lives. This isn't just a tale about romance. It's about redemption, vulnerability, and what happens when two people from opposite worlds stop running and start believing in love. If you're ready for a story that will tug at your heartstrings, make you smile, and maybe even shed a tear, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Let's begin. The elite atmosphere of the Evermore Lounge whispered of quiet affluence, dim chandeliers, crystal glasses catching soft golden light, and murmurs from couples dining over truffle risotto and vintage wine. This was where New York's elite sealed their mergers, broke hearts, and occasionally agreed to blind dates arranged by persistent mothers. At a secluded corner table, Graham Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore & Co., stared out at the night skyline. Despite the power he wielded, he felt none of it now. His mother had insisted, "You need someone with grace and pedigree," which is exactly why he found himself waiting bored, skeptical for a woman he didn't care to meet. Just then, someone approached. Not in heels or designer silk, but in flats and a black apron. She moved with calm precision, a simple white blouse tucked into black trousers, hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She wasn't his date. She couldn't be. But something about the way she held her notepad with dignity and quiet resilience made him pause. "Evening, sir," she said, ready to order Graham. Tilted his head, bemused. "So this is my mother's idea of a well-mannered match, huh?" The woman blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, I mean..." He gestured lazily to her apron. "Didn't expect my blind date to show up dressed for kitchen duty." A beat of stunned silence passed before her brows drew together in slow-burning disbelief. "I'm not your date," she said, coolly, folding her arms. "I work here. And if I were your date, I'd walk out the moment you opened your mouth." Graham sat up straighter, caught off guard. "Excuse me. You heard me," she replied. "Now either order or stop wasting my time." And just like that, Graham Whitmore, a man used to commanding rooms, silencing boardrooms, and negotiating 8-figure deals, was speechless. She turned to leave, but before she could, another woman swept in. Tall, elegant, draped in navy blue silk, clutching a purse that screamed Fifth Avenue. She slid smoothly into the seat across from him and smiled. "Apologies for the delay," she said, voice syrupy. Traffic was a nightmare. The waitress, Lena Hart, froze for half a second. So this was the real blind date. As Graham realized his mistake, his confidence cracked just enough for their eyes to meet again. Something passed between them. Embarrassment, irritation, and somewhere buried beneath it, curiosity. Without a word, Lena turned and walked away. She had tables to serve, a shift to finish, and a story she never expected to become part of. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Lena Hart did her best to ignore the infuriating man in the corner booth, the one with the suit worth more than her annual rent, and the gaze that lingered just a little too long. But no matter how hard she tried, she could feel his presence, like static electricity in the air. She was clearing her final table, exhausted and ready to clock out when it happened. A middle-aged man, one cocktail over his limit, lurched to his feet and stumbled. In his unsteady sway, he collided directly into Lena. The tray in her hands jerked violently, and a full glass of Merlot launched into the air, landing with a splash across Graham Whitmore's perfectly pressed white shirt. Time froze. All eyes turned to the scene. For a second, Lena could only stare in horror. She braced herself for what would come next. She'd seen it before, powerful men erupting over far less. She expected outrage, entitlement, maybe even humiliation. But Graham stood slowly, not looking at her, but at the drunken man swaying unsteadily nearby. His expression was stone cold. Controlled fury radiated from him like a storm on the edge of breaking. "Oops!" the man slurred with a grin, barely noticing the tension. Graham's fists curled at his sides. The manager came sprinting. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm so terribly sorry!" "Get him out!" Graham said quietly, his voice razor-sharp. Security moved fast. The drunk man was ushered out within seconds, muttering in confusion. Lena remained frozen, stunned, and then unexpectedly, Graham turned toward her. "You all right?" he asked. She blinked. "What I said?" He sighed, seeming irritated even with himself. "Are you okay? I should be asking you that." She replied, glancing at his stained shirt. "You're the one wearing the wine." He looked down and let out a low chuckle. It was the first time she'd seen his face soften. "I suppose I am." Something shifted in that moment. For a breath, he didn't seem like a cold executive or some spoiled heir. He seemed human. But just as quickly, the moment evaporated. He reached into his coat pocket. Lena's eyes narrowed. "If you're about to offer me cash to forget this ever happened, don't bother." He paused, genuinely, taken aback. "You really are something else." Without another word, he laid a few bills on the table, just enough to cover the check, and walked out, his cologne lingering in the air. Lena stood there, rooted in place. She had hoped she'd never have to see Graham Whitmore again. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end of it. Graham Whitmore had conquered boardrooms, dismantled competitors, and signed deals under more pressure than most people faced in a lifetime. But no strategy prepared him for the sharp words of a waitress in a downtown restaurant. He tried to dismiss it, told himself Lena Hart was irrelevant. Just another fleeting annoyance. But her voice stuck in his mind like a melody that refused to fade. "I wouldn't be caught dead with a man who looks at people like they're beneath him." No one spoke to him that way. No one challenged him without agenda or fear. And yet she had. It had been days, and still her defiance echoed. So when he spotted her again at a quaint little cafe near his office, he wasn't sure if it was coincidence or the universe nudging him toward something unexpected. The cafe was a quiet corner of downtown, quaint, modest, not at all the sort of place Graham Whitmore usually frequented. But the moment he stepped inside, his gaze locked on her. Lena Hart was behind the counter, her dark hair pulled back, taking orders with focused efficiency. She hadn't noticed him yet. Graham could have walked out right then. He should have. Instead, he stepped into line. Hands in his pockets, he studied her as she moved from customer to customer. She was polite, professional, but not performative. She wasn't here to charm anyone. She was here to earn her paycheck. When it was finally his turn, she looked up and immediately scowled. "You have got to be kidding me!" Graham smirked. "Nice to see you too." Her voice dropped into a low growl. "What are you doing here?" "Getting coffee," he replied, feigning innocence. "That is what people do at cafes, isn't it?" She rolled her eyes, grabbing a cup. "Great. Just what I needed." He leaned an elbow on the counter, watching her with interest. "Relax, Hart. I didn't come to ruin your day. That part was purely accidental." She didn't look amused. But as she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed just a second, a blink, and yet something passed between them. Something quiet, electric. She snatched her hand back, cleared her throat. "Enjoy your drink," she muttered. Graham took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm sure I will." Scene shift later that evening. Lena told herself it meant nothing, just another encounter with a man who couldn't take a hint. She hated that she noticed the way he listened when she spoke. Hated that his eyes softened sometimes, like he was trying to see past her walls. Hated that she caught herself wondering what it might feel like to be looked at that way without pretense, but she knew his type. Rich, calculated, detached men like Graham Whitmore didn't fall. They acquired. So she stayed clear or tried to. That evening, as she stepped out into the chilly night after her shift, she found him leaning against a sleek silver Jaguar parked just outside the cafe. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered under her breath. He grinned. "Easy. I'm not stalking you. Really, because showing up after my shift feels pretty textbook stalker." He held up his hands in surrender, then reached into his coat. "I come bearing a peace offering." She narrowed her eyes. "What is it?" He pulled out a slim envelope. "Call it compensation for the wine incident. Or maybe just a thank you for keeping things interesting." Lena's blood boiled. "You think I'm a street act you can tip?" She snatched the envelope, shoved it hard against his chest. "I don't want your money." He blinked, caught off guard. "Most people wouldn't hesitate." He said, eyebrows lifted. "I'm not most people." She snapped. "You don't get to throw your money around like it erases your behavior." Graham stared at her. Really stared. She was the first person in years who had looked at him. Not his bank account, not his status, not the headlines, just him. And she wasn't impressed. For a moment, he didn't want to leave. For the first time, someone had drawn a line. He didn't want to cross just to win. He stepped closer, voice quieter. "Why are you so determined to push me away?" Her arms folded. "Why are you so determined to stick around?" Silence. Neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with tension. Tension neither of them could name, but both could feel. Heavy charged. Finally, Graham exhaled, tucked the envelope back into his coat. "Keep your pride," he said softly. Lena gave him a sharp look, turned, and walked away without another word. Graham watched her go, lips twitching into a quiet smile. For once, he didn't have the last word. But something told him this wasn't the end. He had navigated cutthroat mergers, dismantled corporate empires, and negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions. But nothing unsettled Graham Whitmore quite like Lena Hart, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he was trying to win or just hold on to the connection. Graham didn't believe in fate. He believed in data, probability control. Yet somehow he kept crossing paths with Lena Hart. At first he chalked it up to chance, or maybe mild curiosity, a brief distraction from the constant grind of boardrooms and billion-dollar contracts. But then, one evening, changed everything. He had just left a business dinner at the Meridian Hotel, his driver waiting by the curb when he caught a glimpse of movement across the street. Lena. She was crouched beside a man huddled on the sidewalk, weathered and shivering. A stranger most people would ignore, but not her, hidden in shadow. Graham watched as she slipped off her scarf and gently wrapped it around the man's shoulders. She handed him a steaming cup of coffee, then reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a few crumpled notes, likely all she had left from her shift. She didn't just give, she gave a damn. And in that quiet act of compassion, something in Graham shifted. For the first time in a long time, he questioned what he had. He had wealth, prestige, control, but standing there in the dark, he realized there were things Lena Hart had that he didn't, and maybe never had. Scene changed the next day at the cafe. Lena had always believed Graham Whitmore was incapable of generosity, let alone empathy. But that belief wavered when she overheard a conversation between her manager and a co-worker. "Rent's been paid," her boss said, still stunned. 3 months. Just showed up in our account. No name, no note. Whoever it was, they saved us. Lena froze. A memory flashed Graham, silent and watchful, that calculating gaze softening as he watched her from across the cafe just days earlier. No. She thought it couldn't be him. Could it? For the first time, she wasn't so sure. Maybe Graham Whitmore wasn't the cold-hearted tycoon she had pegged him to be. That evening, everything felt ordinary until it wasn't. The cafe buzzed softly. Lena moved from table to table, her rhythm practiced and effortless. Then the man walked in. Late 40s, polished suit, gold watch, oozing confidence and entitlement. A regular one who flirted too much and tipped too little. Graham walked in minutes later claiming he just wanted an espresso. That's what he told himself. But the moment he saw the man leaning in, whispering too closely, touching Lena's hand like she was a prize up for grabs, he moved. He crossed the floor in long, deliberate strides. When he spoke, his voice was steel. "She's busy." The words cut through the low murmur of the cafe like glass, shattering on tile. Heads turned, silence bloomed. Lena looked up startled. "Graham," the businessman raised a smug eyebrow. "And you are?" Graham's jaw flexed. "Someone who doesn't appreciate vultures wasting her time." The other man laughed, unfazed. "Relax, I was just offering her a drink. She's working." Graham bit out. Lena exhaled slowly, equal parts, frustrated and intrigued. "It's fine," she said. Then, unable to resist, added with a sly smirk, "Unless you're jealous." Something flickered in Graham's expression, something raw, unexpected, but it vanished just as quickly behind his usual mask. "I just don't like seeing people take advantage of you," he muttered, stepping back. Her brow rose. "Right. Because now you care." He didn't answer. Instead, he turned sharply, shooting one last warning glance at the man before walking out. Lena stood frozen, watching him disappear into the night. She should have been annoyed, but her heart told her something else, that maybe Graham Whitmore cared more than he dared admit. His own words looped through his mind like a haunting refrain. "I just don't like seeing people take advantage of you." Had that been a moment of honesty? Or was Graham Whitmore slipping into something far more dangerous than he'd admit even to himself? The following weeks blurred into something unfamiliar. Graham remained. Graham sharp-tongued, insufferably confident, but Lena Hart began to notice small shifts, like how he no longer showed up at the glossy espresso bars he once frequented, but instead took his morning coffee where she worked. How he left generous tips, but only when she wasn't looking. How her grueling evening shifts suddenly ended earlier than scheduled, almost as if someone had whispered to her manager. At first, she brushed it off. Coincidence, maybe. But then one evening she returned home after a long day and paused at her door. A bag rested neatly on the mat, inside fresh vegetables, 2 kinds of pasta, a jar of homemade marinara, and a small bar of dark chocolate. No note, no signature. But she knew. And for the first time she allowed herself to wonder, was she falling for him? Graham. Whitmore had always lived by logic. Emotion was an indulgence, a weakness. Feelings to him were like cracks in a dam. Once they seeped through, everything else unraveled. And yet, here he was, waking up with Lena Hart in his thoughts and falling asleep with her laughter echoing in his head. He noticed things he never meant to. How she brushed a loose curl behind her ear when she was flustered. How her smile softened when she thought no one was watching. How the sight of another man talking to her made something dark and jealous twist inside him. It came to a head one evening when he found himself parked outside her apartment building. He hadn't planned to be there. He had finished a late board meeting, bone-tired, but instead of going home, he'd ended up here, as if this was the only place that felt right. The realization rattled him, because if he let this happen, if he gave in to what he felt, what then? What did he have to offer someone like Lena? His world was titanium and glass. Hers was sunlight and soil. And maybe she deserved more than a man like him could ever give. So he made the hardest choice he'd ever made. He'd let her go. Before she could fall for him, Lena had sensed it before it happened. The change in his voice, the delays, the empty responses that used to carry warmth. He was fading, pulling away. She didn't want to believe it, but then she overheard it the moment everything inside her shattered. She was delivering an order to an upstairs client when she passed by Graham's office door slightly ajar. "I'm telling you she's not right for you." came the sharp voice of an older woman. His mother. She's a barista. Graham, a girl with nothing. You're a Whitmore. Lena's heart began to pound. She should have walked away, but she didn't. Then came his father's scoff, low and derisive. You really think someone like her fits into our world? She held her breath. Graham's voice responded colder than she had ever heard it. She won't be a problem. She's not part of my life. The words landed like a blow to the chest. Not part of his life. A wall slammed into her heart. She turned before the tears could fall, her legs shaky, her soul aching. By the time Graham stepped out of his office that night, Lena was already gone, gone without goodbye, gone with a heart cracked wide open. And this time, it wasn't fate that pulled them apart. It was choice. She packed her things, left no note behind, and vanished. Because if Lena Hart had learned one thing from loving Graham Whitmore, it was this: knowing when to walk away wasn't weakness. It was survival. For Graham, the realization didn't hit when Lena snapped at him, or when he overheard the echo of his parents' disapproval. It struck when he walked into her cafe and found her station abandoned. No laughter behind the counter, no familiar clatter of her movements. Just an emptiness that swallowed the room whole. She was gone. No warning, no goodbye, like a ghost erasing herself from his life completely. That's when Graham understood it wasn't just guilt that twisted in his chest. It was love. Raw, terrifying, real. Not the love he had claimed in past relationships. Strategic, tidy, transactional. This was messier, deeper, irreplaceable. Because Lena Hart had changed him, and now she was gone. And so, for the first time in his life, Graham Whitmore, the man who never chased anyone, went after someone. Finding Lena was harder than closing a billion-dollar deal. She had quit her job, changed her number, disappeared into the quiet corners of the city, but Graham wasn't built to quit. He dug, called in favors, turned over stones no one else could touch. Eventually, he found her. A small bookshop nestled in a sleepy neighborhood across town. Nothing fancy, just the kind of place that smelled like old paper-warm tea and peace. And there she was, behind the counter arranging a stack of hardcovers. She looked different, softer somehow, but her eyes had lost the fire when they met his, and that gutted him. He stepped through the door, the bell above ringing faintly. She froze. Then before she could speak, before she could ask him to leave, Graham spoke loudly, deliberately in front of everyone. I was wrong, Lena. A hush fell across the bookshop. A few customers looked up, intrigued. Lena's breath caught Graham. But he wasn't done. His voice cracked slightly, but he held steady. I was a coward. I told myself I was pushing you away to protect you. But I wasn't. He stepped forward, eyes locked on hers. I was protecting me. Her lips parted, but no words came. I was scared of what I felt. He continued, voice raw. Scared of you, of how much I loved you. She blinked rapidly. Her hands trembled by her sides. He was close now, so close he could feel the air shift between them. But you know what scares me more than all of that. His voice dropped to a whisper, living without you. Her eyes filled with tears. The shop was still. The world held its breath. Then softly she whispered, You absolute idiot. And before he could react, she launched into his arms. For weeks Lena had tried to convince herself it was over, that he wouldn't come. That whatever they had wasn't real. But here he was, soaked in rain, breathing hard, vulnerable in a way she never imagined. He had come. He had chosen her, and in that moment, there was only one answer. Yes, she whispered. Graham pulled back, eyes searching hers. Yes. A laugh broke through her tears. Yes, you idiot. I love you too. He exhaled a shaky breath, then kissed her softly, fully. No guards, no games, just truth. Outside, the sky shifted to lavender and gold. And for the first time in both their lives, they weren't running from anything. They were running toward something. The ocean whispered gently in the background, the tide rising and falling like a steady heartbeat. A soft path of candles flickered along the beach, leading to a white gazebo wrapped in fairy lights. Every detail had been carefully prepared. Quiet music floating on the breeze flowers, swaying in time with the wind, and the scent of salt and jasmine in the air. And at the end of it all stood Graham Whitmore. In a white shirt sleeves, slightly rolled, the evening light painting gold across his skin. His hands were steady, his heartbeat wasn't. He was about to change both their lives. Lena Hart had no idea. She thought it was just a weekend getaway, a quiet escape from the rhythm of the city and the lives they had slowly begun weaving together. But as she stepped onto the beach and followed the trail of light, her breath caught. There he was. And when she saw him, really saw him, something in her heart gave way. Her steps quickened, her hands trembled. When she reached him, he took both her hands in his. The look in his eyes, full of honesty, vulnerability, and unwavering love, made her knees falter. No one spoke. Then slowly, Graham lowered himself to one knee. "Lena Hart," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A year ago, I mistook you for someone else." She let out a small breath of laughter through her tears. "But that moment," he continued, "turned out to be the best mistake of my life." Lena's eyes were shining now, lips trembling. "You challenged me, changed me. You made me want to become the kind of man who deserves to stand beside you. And now, I can't imagine a single day without you in it." From his pocket, he pulled a velvet box and opened it, a delicate ring catching the light like morning dew. "So, Lena," his voice cracked slightly, "will you marry me?" There was no hesitation. Her whole body shook as she knelt to meet him. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Graham. 1,000 times. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with the certainty of a man who had finally found home. 1 year later, the wedding was simple, elegant, unforgettable. They said their vows under the same gazebo, this time surrounded by people who had watched their story unfold, friends, family, lives they had touched without even realizing it. But it wasn't just about the wedding. It was about everything they built afterward. With Lena's heart for others and Graham's resources, they launched the Hart-Whitmore Initiative, a foundation focused on providing education and shelter for underserved youth. For every life they touched, they were reminded why their love mattered, because it gave back. And every morning Graham woke beside the woman who had once called him an arrogant fool. Now she called him home. He watched her from across the garden one afternoon, surrounded by children from one of the foundation's schools. Her laughter was unfiltered joy, and when she looked up and caught him watching, she smiled. And Graham Whitmore, the man who once believed love had no place in his world, smiled back. Because now he knew love wasn't the distraction he feared. It was the anchor he'd been missing. He used to think he had it all: money, success, status. But it took one mistake, one fearless woman, one love he couldn't let go of, to show him what really mattered. And Lena Hart. She never imagined a misunderstanding would lead her to the greatest truth of her life. That love doesn't always arrive when we expect it, but when it does, it stays, even when it starts with a simple mistake. If this story moved, you don't forget to share, and subscribe to soul-stirring stories. Turn on the notifications so you never miss a tale of love, hope, and redemption. Because sometimes the greatest love stories begin exactly where they shouldn't, and that's what makes them unforgettable. Sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from the messiest of mistakes. Graham Whitmore thought he had everything: wealth, power, control, but it took a fierce, compassionate woman like Lena Hart to show him what truly matters: love, humility, and the courage to choose someone every single day. From a mistaken identity to a love story that rebuilt 2 lives, their journey reminds us that love isn't always perfect, but it's always worth it. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more emotional human tales that remind us just how extraordinary ordinary people can be. Until next time, remember, sometimes love finds us when we least expect it. And sometimes it's the best mistake we ever make.